The sun beat down mercilessly on Limestone Creek, Colorado, as Lillian Foster stood alone at the altar, her white dress gleaming in the harsh midday light, one hand resting protectively over the small swell of her belly. Every pair of eyes in the small church bored into her with a mixture of pity and judgment as the minutes ticked by and her groom, Thomas Parker, was nowhere to be found. The whispers grew louder as the town pastor shifted uncomfortably, his Bible clutched tightly in weathered hands. "I'm afraid, Miss Foster," the pastor began, his voice low and gentle, "that it appears Mr. Parker will not be joining us today." The words hit Lillian like a physical blow. Her vision blurred with unshed tears as she stared at the empty space beside her, the space where Thomas should have been standing. The man who had promised to love her, to care for her and their unborn child, had abandoned them both on what was meant to be the happiest day of their lives. A collective gasp rippled through the congregation as a tall figure rose from the back pew. Garrett Fletcher, his tan Stetson clutched respectfully in calloused hands, moved with purpose down the aisle. His spurs jangled softly against the wooden floorboards, the only sound in the otherwise silent church. He stopped at the altar steps, his blue eyes meeting Lillian's tear-filled gaze. "I'll take his place," Garrett announced, his deep voice carrying throughout the small church. "If Miss Foster will have me." It was 1875, and in the rough mining town of Limestone Creek, scandals spread faster than wildfire. For Lillian, a schoolteacher with a baby on the way and no husband, life would become unbearable. Garrett's offer wasn't just unexpected, it was salvation. Lillian stared at the man standing before her. Garrett Fletcher was everything Thomas was not: steady, reliable, respected. A successful rancher who kept to himself, Garrett was known throughout the county for his honest dealings and hard work. But she barely knew him beyond polite greetings on Main Street. "Mr. Fletcher," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you don't have to do this." "I know I don't," he replied, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But a child needs a father, and you deserve better than this." He gestured vaguely at the empty spot beside her. The pastor cleared his throat. "Miss Foster, would you like to proceed?" Time seemed to stand still as Lillian considered her options. To decline would mean facing the town's scorn alone, struggling to provide for her child as an unwed mother. To accept would mean binding herself to a virtual stranger, a kind one certainly, but a stranger nonetheless. "Yes," she finally said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I would like to proceed." The ceremony that followed was brief and solemn. Garrett's hand, warm and strong, held hers steadily as they exchanged vows. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, there was no passionate kiss, only a gentle squeeze of her hand and a reassuring nod. As they walked down the aisle together, Lillian could feel the weight of stares following them. Mrs. Holbrook, the mayor's wife, didn't even try to hide her disapproval, while others looked on with curious fascination. Garrett kept his head high, his arm supporting Lillian as they stepped out into the bright Colorado sunshine. A modest buggy waited outside, not the decorated carriage that had been prepared for her wedding to Thomas. Garrett helped her up, careful of her dress, before climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "Where are we going?" Lillian asked, suddenly realizing she had no idea where her new husband lived. "To my ranch," Garrett replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "It's about 5 miles outside of town. It's not fancy, but it's comfortable enough. I hope you'll find it suitable." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the occasional creak of the wagon. Lillian's mind raced with questions, fears, and an overwhelming sense of disbelief at how quickly her life had changed. "Why did you do it, Mr. Fletcher?" she finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "Why would you marry a woman you barely know, especially one in my condition?" Garrett was quiet for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, thoughtful. "I've known Thomas Parker since we were boys," he said. "I know what kind of man he is: selfish, unreliable. When I heard about your situation, I thought it wasn't right for you to suffer for his mistakes." He paused. "And please call me Garrett. I reckon if we're married, we should at least be on a first-name basis." "Garrett," Lillian repeated softly. "I'm still not sure I understand." "Your reputation, your standing in the community, you risked it all for me." "My reputation will survive," he said with a small smile. "And as for standing in the community, I've never much cared what people think. I do what I believe is right." As they crested a small hill, Garrett's ranch came into view. It wasn't grand by any means, but it was well kept, a sturdy two-story house with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings spread across the property. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a small creek wound its way through the western edge of the land. "Welcome to your new home, Mrs. Fletcher," Garrett said, guiding the horse toward the house. The title startled Lillian. Mrs. Fletcher. She was married now to this kind but enigmatic man. As the buggy pulled up to the house, a middle-aged woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Garrett called out, "I'd like you to meet my wife, Lillian." The woman's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly recovered, offering Lillian a warm smile as Garrett helped her down from the buggy. "Welcome, Mrs. Fletcher," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice carrying a slight Spanish accent. "I had no idea Mr. Fletcher was getting married today." "The house isn't prepared for a bride. It was a rather sudden decision," Garrett explained, his tone neutral. "Mrs. Rodriguez is my housekeeper. She comes in 3 times a week to cook and clean." "It's lovely to meet you," Lillian said, still feeling as though she were moving through a dream. Mrs. Rodriguez led them inside, chattering nervously about preparing a special dinner to celebrate. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable: polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and a few touches that spoke of care. Books lining shelves along one wall, a well-tended fireplace, and clean windows that let in plenty of light. "I'll show you to your room," Garrett said, leading Lillian up the stairs. "You must be tired after everything." He opened a door to reveal a spacious bedroom with a large 4-poster bed, a dresser, and a washstand. A window overlooked the ranch, offering a view of the rolling hills beyond. "This will be your room," Garrett said. "Mine is across the hall. I thought you might want your privacy." Lillian turned to him, confusion evident on her face. "But we're married now." "In name only," Garrett replied gently. "I didn't offer marriage expecting anything from you, Lillian. You need protection and support for you and your child. I can provide that without imposing on you in other ways." Relief and an unexpected twinge of disappointment mingled in Lillian's chest. "I don't know what to say, Mr. Garrett. Your kindness is overwhelming." "It's not kindness," he said, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. "It's decency. Now I'll let you rest. Mrs. Rodriguez will call us when dinner is ready." Left alone, Lillian sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back to fall freely. She cried for the humiliation she'd endured, for the future she'd imagined with Thomas that would never come to pass, and for the strange turn her life had taken. But as the tears subsided, she felt a small flicker of hope. Whatever his reasons, Garrett Fletcher had saved her today. Perhaps, in this unexpected marriage, she might find some measure of peace. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Garrett rose early each morning to tend to the ranch, returning for breakfast before heading out again until dinner. Lillian, accustomed to the structured days of teaching, found herself at loose ends in her new home. "You're welcome to make any changes you see fit," Garrett told her over breakfast one morning, a week after their wedding. "This is your home now." "Thank you," Lillian replied. "I was thinking, perhaps I could plant a vegetable garden. The soil near the kitchen window looks good." "Of course," Garrett nodded. "Whatever you like. Mrs. Rodriguez might appreciate the fresh vegetables." The garden became Lillian's first project, a way to feel useful in her new surroundings. Mrs. Rodriguez, initially wary of another woman taking over her domain, soon warmed to Lillian as they worked together in the kitchen, exchanging recipes and stories. "Mr. Fletcher is a good man," Mrs. Rodriguez said one afternoon as they prepared dinner, "but very private. He has been alone too long, I think." "Has he never been married before?" Lillian asked, curious about the man who was now her husband. Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. "No. There was a young woman many years ago, but it did not work out. Since then, he has kept to himself. Until you." Lillian considered this information as she helped prepare the meal. Garrett was indeed private, maintaining a polite distance between them despite their shared last name. He was unfailingly kind and considerate, making sure she had everything she needed, but he never crossed the invisible boundary he had established on their wedding day. That evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Lillian decided to broach the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Garrett," she began, setting down her fork, "I want to thank you again for what you did for me, but I can't help feeling that I'm not contributing enough to our arrangement." Garrett looked up from his plate, his expression thoughtful. "You don't need to worry about that, Lillian. I'm not lacking for anything." "Even so," she persisted, "I was a teacher before. I'm used to working, to having purpose. Perhaps I could help with the ranch books. I've always been good with numbers." A small smile touched Garrett's lips. "As it happens, I could use help with that. I'm not much for paperwork." The next day, Garrett showed her to a small study off the main living room, where account books and correspondence were stacked somewhat haphazardly on a desk. "It's a bit of a mess," he admitted. "I've been meaning to organize it all, but there's always something more pressing to do around the ranch." Lillian surveyed the room, already planning how she would bring order to the chaos. "I can handle this," she said confidently. "You focus on the ranch, and I'll make sure the business side of things is in order." As weeks turned into months, Lillian found her place at the Fletcher ranch. Her belly grew rounder and the garden flourished under her care. She reorganized the household accounts, discovering that Garrett was actually more prosperous than his modest lifestyle suggested. "You've been investing in railroad stock," she remarked one evening, looking up from the ledger. "That's quite forward-thinking." Garrett shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "My father always said land wasn't the only way to build security. The railroads are changing everything. It seemed wise to be part of that change rather than resist it." "Your father sounds like he was a smart man." "He was," Garrett agreed, a hint of sadness in his voice. "He and my mother died in a flash flood 10 years ago. That's when I took over the ranch." Lillian reached across the table and placed her hand over his, the first time she had initiated such contact between them. "I'm sorry for your loss." Garrett looked down at their hands, then met her eyes. "Thank you. What about your family? You've never mentioned them." "They're back east," Lillian explained. "My father is a banker in Boston. They didn't approve of my decision to come west and teach. We haven't spoken in years." "And they don't know about the baby?" Lillian shook her head. "No, I couldn't bear to tell them. They warned me about leaving, said I would come to ruin out here." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose they were right in a way." Garrett's hand turned beneath hers, his fingers closing around her own. "You haven't come to ruin, Lillian. You're building a life here, a good one, I hope." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, Lillian felt a connection deeper than the practical partnership they had established. But the moment passed as Garrett gently withdrew his hand and stood. "It's getting late. I have to be up at dawn tomorrow. We're moving the herd to the north pasture." Lillian nodded, feeling strangely bereft as she watched him leave the room. That night, lying alone in her bed, she found herself wondering what it would be like to truly be Garrett's wife, in every sense of the word. The following week brought Thomas Parker back to Limestone Creek. Lillian was in town, purchasing fabric for baby clothes, when she saw him outside the saloon, laughing with some companions as if he hadn't shattered her world just months before. He spotted her at the same moment, his laughter dying as he took in her obviously pregnant form. For a moment they stared at each other across the dusty street. Then, to Lillian's horror, Thomas started toward her. "Lillian," he called, his voice carrying the false charm she had once found so appealing. "I heard you got married, to Garrett Fletcher of all people." Lillian straightened her spine, determined not to show any weakness. "Mr. Parker," she acknowledged coolly. "Yes, I am Mrs. Fletcher now." Thomas moved closer, lowering his voice. "Come now, Lil. You can drop the act with me. We both know why Fletcher married you." His eyes dropped to her swollen belly. "That's my child you're carrying." "No," Lillian said firmly. "This is my child. You gave up any claim to it when you abandoned us both on our wedding day." Thomas reached out to grab her arm, but his hand never made contact. Garrett appeared as if from nowhere, his strong fingers closing around Thomas's wrist. "I believe my wife was just leaving," Garrett said, his voice deceptively calm, though Lillian could see the anger in the tight line of his jaw. Thomas wrenched his arm free, sneering. "Your wife? That's rich, Fletcher. We both know what you got my leavings." The punch happened so fast that Lillian barely saw it. One moment Thomas was standing there with his contemptuous smile, and the next he was sprawled in the dirt, blood streaming from his nose. Garrett stood over him, his breathing steady despite the violence of his action. "If you ever speak to or about my wife like that again, a bloody nose will be the least of your concerns." He turned to Lillian, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" Shaken but oddly exhilarated, Lillian nodded. "Yes, thank you." Garrett offered his arm, and she took it gratefully, aware of the stares following them as they walked toward their wagon. The ride home was quiet, Lillian stealing glances at Garrett's profile, noting the lingering tension in his shoulders. "I apologize for losing my temper," he finally said as the ranch came into view. "I know you don't approve of violence." "You were defending me," Lillian replied. "Though I admit, I've never seen that side of you before." Garrett's hands tightened on the reins. "There are sides of me I hope you never have to see, Lillian, but I won't stand by while anyone disrespects you, especially not Thomas Parker." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Lillian found the courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her since their encounter in town. "Garrett, why do you dislike Thomas so much? You mentioned you knew him since childhood, but it seems deeper than that." Garrett was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, tinged with old pain. "Thomas Parker took something precious from me once," he said. "Something I can never get back." "What was it?" Lillian asked gently, sensing they were approaching the heart of a mystery. Garrett sighed. "My sister Grace. She was 18, beautiful, full of life. Thomas courted her, promised her the world, got her with child, then left her, much as he did you." His hands clenched into fists. "She died trying to birth that baby. The child, too. I found her in our barn. She'd been too ashamed to tell anyone, tried to deliver it herself." Lillian gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Garrett, I'm so sorry." "It was a long time ago," he said, though the tightness in his voice belied his words. 12 years. But when I heard about you, about your condition and how he'd left you at the altar, I couldn't let history repeat itself. Understanding dawned on Lillian with startling clarity. "So that's why you married me, because of Grace." Garrett turned to her then, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "At first, yes, I wanted to spare you Grace's fate, but Lillian—" He hesitated, seeming to struggle with his words. "These past months with you, I've never—" Whatever he had been about to say remained unspoken as Lillian suddenly gasped, her hands flying to her belly. "What is it?" Garrett asked, alarm evident in his voice. "Is it the baby?" Lillian nodded, her face contorted in pain. "I think so. It's too early, though. It shouldn't be coming for another month at least." Garrett was on his feet in an instant. "I'll fetch Dr. Simmons. Mrs. Rodriguez is still here. She'll help you to bed." The next hours passed in a blur of pain for Lillian. Dr. Simmons arrived, his face grave as he examined her. Mrs. Rodriguez boiled water and prepared clean linens, murmuring prayers in Spanish. And Garrett, against all convention, refused to leave the bedroom, staying by Lillian's side, holding her hand through each contraction. "The baby's turned wrong," Dr. Simmons announced after a particularly difficult examination. "I'll need to try to turn it. Mrs. Fletcher, this will be painful." Lillian nodded, too exhausted to speak. Garrett's hand tightened around hers. "You can do this," he whispered fiercely. "You're the strongest woman I know, Lillian. You and this baby are going to be fine." The doctor's manipulations brought fresh waves of agony, and Lillian cried out, tears streaming down her face. Garrett never flinched, never looked away, his steady presence anchoring her through the worst of it. "There," Dr. Simmons said at last. "The baby's turned. Now, Mrs. Fletcher, when the next pain comes, I need you to push with all your might." The labor continued through the night, Lillian's strength flagging with each passing hour. As dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, casting the bedroom in a soft golden glow, the cry of a newborn finally pierced the air. "A boy," Dr. Simmons announced, wrapping the tiny, red-faced infant in a clean blanket. "A strong, healthy boy." Exhausted but triumphant, Lillian reached for her son. Garrett helped her sit up, arranging pillows behind her back, his face alight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Would you like to hold him?" she asked, offering the bundle to Garrett. Garrett hesitated, then carefully took the baby, cradling him with surprising tenderness. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Welcome to the world." Watching her husband in that moment, he truly felt like her husband holding her child. Lillian felt something shift inside her. The practical arrangement they had made had somehow, without her noticing, transformed into something real and precious. "What will you name him?" Garrett asked, returning the baby to her arms. Lillian looked down at her son's tiny face. "I thought perhaps William, after my grandfather." "William Fletcher," Garrett said, testing the name. "It's a good name, strong." "William Garrett Fletcher," Lillian amended, looking up to gauge his reaction. "If that's all right with you." Garrett's expression softened, a rare, full smile transforming his face. "I would be honored." In the weeks that followed, Lillian discovered new depths to her husband as they adjusted to life with a newborn. Garrett proved to be a natural father, seemingly unfazed by midnight feedings or diaper changes. He would often take William for a walk around the ranch in the evenings, the baby securely cradled in one arm while he pointed out cattle and horses and the changing colors of the sunset. One evening, as Lillian sat on the porch nursing William, Garrett joined her, settling into the chair beside hers with a contented sigh. "He's growing so fast," Garrett observed, watching the baby at Lillian's breast. "Soon he'll be running around the ranch, getting into everything." Lillian smiled, stroking William's downy head. He already has your curiosity. Have you noticed how he watches everything? He has your eyes, though, Garrett replied, clear and intelligent. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the soft sounds of William's nursing and the distant lowing of cattle. Lillian found herself studying Garrett's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "Garrett," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about our arrangement." He turned to her, his expression guarded. "Oh, yes, I'm very grateful for everything you've done for William and me. You've given us a home, protection, your name, but I can't help wondering." She hesitated, gathering her courage. "Is this all there is to be between us? A practical partnership?" Garrett's gaze dropped to William, then back to Lillian's face. "What more would you want, Lillian?" "I want." She took a deep breath. "I want a real marriage with you." For a long moment, Garrett didn't respond, and Lillian feared she had misread everything, that the growing affection she felt for him was one-sided. Then he reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've wanted that since the moment I saw you standing alone at that altar," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I didn't want you to feel obligated. You didn't choose me, Lillian. I chose you." "And now I'm choosing you," she replied, her heart pounding. "If you'll have me, truly have me as your wife." Garrett's answer came not in words but in action. Rising from his chair, he knelt beside her, carefully mindful of William, and cupped her face in his hands. His kiss was gentle at first, a question, then deeper as she responded, a promise. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Lillian Fletcher. I think I have since that first day." "And I love you," she whispered back, the words feeling both new and like something she had known all along. "My brave, honorable husband." That night, after William was settled in his cradle, Lillian went not to her own room but to Garrett's. Their coming together was tender and unhurried, a discovery of each other that left them both trembling with emotion. As Lillian lay in the circle of Garrett's arms afterward, she marveled at the strange path that had led her here from abandonment and despair to love and belonging. "What are you thinking?" Garrett asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm thinking that sometimes the most unexpected turns in life lead us exactly where we're meant to be," she answered, pressing a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. The following spring brought changes to the Fletcher ranch. With Lillian's efficient management of the accounts and Garrett's natural skill with the land and cattle, the ranch prospered. They added new pastureland, increased their herd, and hired additional hands to help with the expanding operation. William grew into a sturdy, curious toddler, the light of both his parents' lives. He took his first steps in the garden Lillian had planted, falling into a bed of lettuce with peals of laughter that brought Garrett running from the barn to see what all the commotion was about. "Just like his mother," Garrett commented, scooping William up and brushing dirt from his clothes. "Always determined to do things his own way." Lillian raised an eyebrow. "I believe that particular trait comes from his father, Mr. Fletcher." Their easy banter was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Rodriguez, who hurried from the house with an envelope in hand. "Mr. Fletcher, a letter came for Mrs. Fletcher, from Boston." Lillian accepted the envelope with trembling fingers, recognizing her father's handwriting immediately. She had finally written to her parents a few months earlier, telling them of her marriage and their grandson. She hadn't been sure they would respond. "You want to read it alone?" Garrett asked, sensitive to her anxiety. Lillian shook her head. "No, whatever it says, we'll face it together." The letter was brief, but not unkind. Her parents expressed surprise at her news but offered cautious congratulations. They had enclosed a small silver rattle for William and extended an invitation for the Fletchers to visit Boston, when convenient. "Will you want to go?" Garrett asked that evening as they prepared for bed. "To Boston, I mean, to see your family." Lillian considered the question. "Perhaps someday, but not yet. Our life is here, Garrett. This is our home." He smiled, drawing her into his arms. "I'm glad to hear it. I'm not sure how I'd manage in Boston society anyway." "You charm them all," Lillian assured him, laughing. "Just as you charmed me." "Did I?" Garrett asked, his tone playful. "I don't recall much charming, just a desperate proposal and a lot of awkward silences." "There was charm beneath all that gruffness," Lillian insisted, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "I just had to look for it." Their kiss deepened, desire quickly replacing playfulness. Later, as they lay entwined in their shared bed, Lillian felt a flutter in her belly, a familiar sensation that she had only recently confirmed with Dr. Simmons. "Garrett," she whispered, placing his hand over the still flat plane of her stomach. "There's something I need to tell you." He went very still, his eyes finding hers in the dim light of their bedroom. "Lillian, are you?" She nodded, smiling at the wonder in his face. "Yes, Dr. Simmons says the baby should arrive in the fall." Garrett gathered her close, burying his face in her hair. "Another child," he murmured. "Our child." The emphasis on the word, "our," wasn't lost on Lillian. Though Garrett had never once treated William as anything but his own son, she knew this new life represented something special, a physical embodiment of their love for each other. "I hope it's a girl this time," Garrett said, his hand still resting on her belly, "with your golden hair and quick mind." "And your kindness," Lillian added, "your strength." As summer gave way to autumn, Limestone Creek buzzed with news of the Fletcher Ranch's success and the impending addition to the family. Even Mrs. Holbrook, who had once looked at Lillian with such disapproval, now greeted her warmly when they met in town. "Quite a turnaround from our wedding day," Lillian remarked to Garrett after one such encounter. "Remember how everyone stared, how they whispered? People will always talk," Garrett replied philosophically. "What matters is giving them something worth talking about." The baby arrived on a crisp October evening, with considerably less drama than William's birth. After only a few hours of labor, Lillian delivered a healthy baby girl, whom they named Grace Elizabeth Fletcher. "She's perfect," Garrett whispered, tears in his eyes as he held his daughter for the first time. "Absolutely perfect." Watching her husband cradle their newborn, with William balanced on his knee to peer curiously at his sister, Lillian felt a fullness in her heart that she had never imagined possible. From the depths of humiliation and abandonment, she had found her way to this moment of complete happiness. Life on the Fletcher Ranch settled into a pattern shaped by the seasons and the children's growth. William, at 4, was already showing an interest in ranch work, trailing after Garrett whenever he could. Little Gracie, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's golden curls, was the darling of everyone who met her. The summer of 1880 brought an unexpected visitor to the ranch. Lillian was in the garden with the children when a buggy approached, driven by a man she hadn't seen in years. "Thomas," she said, automatically drawing the children closer as her former fiancé pulled the buggy to a stop. He looked older, worn in a way that spoke of hard living. "Lillian," he greeted her, his voice lacking the charm it had once held. "I heard you had children now, 2 of them." William stepped protectively in front of his mother and sister, his small face set in a determined frown that was so like Garrett's that Lillian had to suppress a smile despite her unease. "What do you want, Thomas?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Thomas hesitated, then climbed down from the buggy. "I'm leaving Colorado," he said. "Heading to California. I thought I should see the boy before I go, just once." Lillian stiffened. William is Garrett's son in every way that matters. You gave up any right to him when you abandoned us. I know that, Thomas said, looking at William with an expression Lillian couldn't quite decipher. I'm not here to claim him. I just wanted to see him to say, I'm sorry. Before Lillian could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats announced Garrett's return. He dismounted in one fluid motion, moving to stand beside his family, his posture protective but not threatening. Parker, he acknowledged, his voice neutral. What brings you here? Thomas straightened, meeting Garrett's gaze directly. Just saying goodbye, Fletcher. I'm leaving for California tomorrow. The two men regarded each other for a long moment, years of history and hurt hanging between them. Then, to Lillian's surprise, Garrett extended his hand. Safe travels, then. Thomas stared at the offered hand, then slowly shook it. You've done well for yourself, Fletcher, for them too. He glanced at Lillian and the children. Better than I would have. Yes, Garrett agreed simply. I have. With a nod, Thomas returned to his buggy, casting one last look at the family before driving away. Lillian watched until the dust from his departure settled, then turned to her husband. Are you all right? She asked, reaching for his hand. Garrett's fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. More than all right, he replied, lifting their joined hands to kiss her knuckles. I have everything I could ever want right here. That evening, after the children were asleep, Lillian and Garrett sat on their porch swing, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The encounter with Thomas had stirred old memories, but rather than bringing pain, it had only highlighted how far they had come. You ever regret it? Lillian asked, her head resting on Garrett's shoulder. Stepping forward that day, offering to marry me. Garrett's arm tightened around her. Never, not for a single moment. Even though you didn't love me then. But I did, he countered, turning to look at her. Not in the way I love you now, perhaps, but I admired you, respected you, cared for you. That's a kind of love, too. Lillian smiled, understanding what he meant. And now? Garrett cupped her face in his hands, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Now, Lillian Fletcher, I love you with everything I am. You and our children are my world, my heart, my home. As his lips found hers in a tender kiss, Lillian reflected on the strange, winding path that had led them here. A path that began with abandonment and heartbreak, but had somehow, against all odds, brought her to the truest, deepest love she could have imagined. The years rolled by, bringing changes both subtle and profound to the Fletcher family. The railroad finally reached Limestone Creek in 1882, transforming the once isolated town into a bustling hub of commerce. Garrett's investments paid off handsomely, allowing them to expand the ranch further and build a larger house to accommodate their growing family. In 1883, Lillian gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and Joseph, who inherited their father's quiet strength and their mother's love of books. The Fletcher children thrived under their parents' loving guidance, each developing their own distinct personalities and interests. William, now 10 years old, showed a natural aptitude for ranching, absorbing everything Garrett taught him about cattle and land management. He had his mother's golden hair but his father's steady temperament, and the ranch hands already treated him with the respect due to Garrett Fletcher's son and heir. 8-year-old Grace had inherited her mother's teaching abilities, often organizing impromptu lessons for her younger brothers. She was bright and curious, constantly asking questions that sometimes left her parents searching for answers. The twins, at 5, were inseparable companions who seemed to communicate in a language all their own. Samuel was the more adventurous of the pair, always leading the way into new explorations, while Joseph was thoughtful and observant, often noticing details others missed. Lillian, approaching her 35th birthday, had never been happier. The scandalous circumstances of her first pregnancy and hasty marriage had long since faded into memory, replaced by the community's respect for the Fletcher family's contributions to Limestone Creek's prosperity. She had even returned to teaching in a way, offering lessons to the children of neighboring ranches whose families couldn't easily reach the town school. Garrett had converted one of the outbuildings into a small schoolhouse, complete with desks, a blackboard, and shelves of books. "You're glowing today," Garrett remarked one afternoon as Lillian returned from teaching. At 40, he was still as handsome as the day they'd met, though silver now threaded through the hair at his temples. "The lessons went well, very well," Lillian replied, accepting his greeting kiss. "Little Anna Johnson can finally read a full page on her own. You should have seen her face, Garrett. She was so proud." Garrett smiled, helping her remove her shawl. "Not as proud as her teacher, I'd wager." "Perhaps not," Lillian admitted with a laugh. "Where are the children?" "William's helping with the new calves. Grace is reading to the twins in the garden. Something about knights and dragons last I checked." Lillian started toward the door, but Garrett caught her hand, drawing her back. "Wait, there's something I want to show you first." Curious, Lillian allowed him to lead her upstairs to their bedroom. On the bed lay a large package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked, looking to Garrett for explanation. "Open it and see," he urged, a boyish excitement in his eyes. Lillian carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful blue dress made of fine silk, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "Garrett, it's exquisite," she breathed, running her fingers over the luxurious fabric. "But what's the occasion?" 10 years, he answered, his voice soft with emotion. "Next week marks 10 years since the day you became my wife. I thought we might have a proper celebration this time, with dancing and cake and all the things you didn't get the first time around." Lillian's eyes filled with tears as she placed the dress carefully on the bed and turned to embrace her husband. "It's perfect. You're perfect." Garrett laughed, holding her close. "Hardly perfect, my love, but I try." The anniversary celebration became a town event, with neighbors and friends gathering at the Fletcher Ranch to honor the couple. Mrs. Rodriguez and her daughters prepared a feast, and someone brought a fiddle for dancing. Lillian, radiant in her blue silk dress, found herself the center of attention in a way she had never been at her first wedding. As Garrett led her in a waltz, she marveled at how far they had come from that tense, uncertain day 10 years earlier. "Happy," Garrett murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back as they moved across the makeshift dance floor. "Completely," she answered, gazing up at him with love. "Thank you for this, Garrett, for everything." Later, as the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Lillian found herself standing with Mrs. Holbrook, the mayor's wife who had once looked at her with such judgment. "You know, Mrs. Holbrook said, sipping her punch, when Mr. Fletcher stepped forward at your first wedding, I thought he'd lost his mind, taking on another man's responsibility like that." She shook her head, her expression softening. "But watching you two together all these years, it's clear as day he knew exactly what he was doing. It's rare to see a love like yours." "Thank you, Mrs. Holbrook," Lillian replied, touched by the older woman's words. "We've been very blessed." After the last guest had left and the children were tucked into bed, Lillian and Garrett stood on their porch, gazing up at the star-filled Colorado sky. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, they savored the peaceful moment. "When I was a girl, dreaming of marriage," Lillian said softly, "this isn't how I imagined it would happen." "No?" Garrett asked, amusement in his voice. "Being left at the altar and rescued by a taciturn rancher wasn't part of the fantasy," Lillian laughed, turning in his embrace to face him. "Strangely, no, But Garrett, if I could go back and change things, I wouldn't. Not a single moment of our journey together. Not even the difficult parts, he asked, his expression growing serious. The scandal, the whispers, Thomas's abandonment, not even those, she confirmed. Because they led me to you, to our children, to this life we've built together. She reached up to trace the line of his jaw, her touch tender. You stepped forward when I needed you most, and in doing so, you gave me so much more than just your name or your protection. You gave me love, Garrett. The kind that grows stronger with each passing year. Garrett covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. And you gave me a family, Lillian, something I never thought I'd have after Grace died. You brought light back into my life when I'd resigned myself to living in shadows. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the vast Colorado sky, Lillian reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. What had begun as an act of decency, and honor had blossomed into a love deeper and more enduring than either of them could have imagined. Come, Garrett said at last, taking her hand. Let's go to bed, Mrs. Fletcher. Tomorrow comes early. And we have the rest of our lives to look forward to, Lillian added, following her husband into the home they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the love, the family, the shared dreams that made it truly theirs. As the years continued to pass, the Fletcher Ranch became known throughout Colorado as one of the most successful operations in the state. William, now a young man of 20, had taken on more responsibility, working alongside his father with a dedication that made both his parents proud. Grace, at 18, had followed in her mother's footsteps and become a teacher at the Limestone Creek School. With her quick mind and compassionate heart, she quickly became beloved by her students and their parents alike. The twins, Samuel and Joseph, were 15 and as different as night and day despite their identical appearance. Samuel was drawn to the excitement of the expanding West, talking of joining the railroad company when he was older, while Joseph showed an interest in medicine after helping the local doctor deliver a neighbor's baby. Lillian, watching her children grow and find their own paths, sometimes marveled at how quickly time had passed. She and Garrett were in their 40s now, with silver threading through her golden hair and deepening the touches of gray at his temples. But their love had only grown stronger with the passing years, deepening into something so essential to both of them that it was like the air they breathed, constant, necessary, life-giving. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked one evening as they sat together on their porch swing, a familiar position they had maintained through more than 20 years of marriage. "About time," Lillian answered, her head resting on his shoulder. "How quickly it passes, how precious each moment is." Garrett's arm tightened around her. "Having regrets, Mrs. Fletcher?" "Not a single one," she assured him, reaching for his hand and threading her fingers through his. "Just gratitude for you, for our children, for the life we've built together." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his voice warm with affection. "Who would have thought that day in the church that we'd end up here?" Lillian smiled, remembering the man who had stepped forward when she needed him most. "I think you did," she said softly. "Even then, you saw possibilities that I couldn't." "I saw you," Garrett replied simply. "That was enough." As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and purple, Lillian Fletcher closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of thanks for the unexpected turns her life had taken, for the heartbreak that had led to healing, for the moment when a quiet, honorable man had stepped forward and said, "I'll take her place," and most of all, for the love that had grown from that moment, a love that had given her not just a name or protection or security, but a true partner with whom to share all of life's joys and sorrows. a love born of honor and kindness that had blossomed into something rare and precious and enduring, a love that would last for all their days.